Welcome to FXpert Trading, where I use time cycles, median lines, and other technical analysis to identify trade setups in the US stock markets as well as the FX markets. If you like the information contained within this video, be sure to subscribe for more. This update is going to be for the S&P 500. However, we will quickly review the EURUSD, the USDCAD, the USDCHF, and the EURJPY. We are on the EURUSD 3-hour chart. We are expecting to continue lower as we are in the back half of this longer-term blue cycle as well as this longer-term pink cycle. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but I'm going to go to the 4-hour chart really quickly to show how I re-entered into this position. As I mentioned in the last video, using the 50 SMA on the 4-hour time frame after we broke below what is believed to be the low of this prior orange cycle, which should indicate this next orange cycle should continue lower, and we would then expect further downside. I don't necessarily think we will reach this median line down here, as I discussed in the last video, but I will take some profit at about 1.24 to 1, and then this second position I'll manage by moving the stop down should we continue to the downside. This is the USDCAD 3-hour chart. I had entered a position last week. I had moved the stop up to underneath here and it had been taken out. And I had also mentioned that USDCHF was setting up for a long position as well. Given the depth of this pullback here and considering we had taken out this shorter time frame low, I did not put on a USDCHF position. Had I done so, I'd still be in that, but I don't like the look of this that early in this cycle. It does not mean it can't continue higher, but I'm going to wait until the end of this orange cycle here to see if we can get a better bounce out of that trough. We are now on the EURJPY chart. As I mentioned in the prior video, I was looking at this bounce here as it lined up perfectly with our orange cycle, and I had added a position here. It's been taken out. Looking back, I should have, considering I was already in EURJPY from back here, I should have waited until we had a higher trough on a lower time frame, which we don't have that trough confirmation yet, but considering this is going into the weekend, the trough would be expected to occur on Saturday or Sunday, which is going to be a higher trough. Therefore, considering the typical entry criteria, that's the wrong indicator. Using the FLD, we have much better movement across it as opposed to the prior cross, which normally I don't concern myself with too much as long as we start to get a couple of closes above. But this is a much cleaner move, which suggests to me there's a much higher likelihood this trough is in, and we are indeed beginning with the new cycle up. And again, this is the new target. This is a long-term median line. I will take my profit before that target. I'm looking at the whole position for about 2.5 to 1. We are now on the SPX daily chart. I'm showing a long-term modified shift median line set, which we are now very close to achieving the median line on. As I mentioned in the last couple of videos, we've been expecting further upside, especially after we put this trough in here. I'm going to switch to the E-mini futures. This is the longer term cycle trough for the blue cycle down here, and early on in the following cycle we should expect bullishness. We are looking for another shorter term trough sometime this week. It's around Wednesday, but it can really come in any day, Monday through Friday this week. I've already discussed in the prior videos exactly how we will look to identify that trough using both the FLD. We'll look for clear movement below and then a clear cross above the FLD. Another way we can do that, I'll go down to the hourly chart and I will turn off the FLD, is we will simply look for at least one of these lower term cycles to take out a low from the prior cycle, and then a return of positive momentum where we put in a higher cycle trough than the prior cycle. That would look something like this, where we put in a cycle low, doesn't matter if it's here or here. We break below in the next cycle, and then the following cycle puts in a trough. It puts in a higher high. This part is not necessarily required, but this is, that we put in a higher trough than the prior cycle. The trough could come in on Monday, it could come in on Tuesday, really it can come in as late as Friday, and that would be perfectly normal. What should we expect after we put in that trough? Well, in my opinion, I think we'll continue up to this longer term median line. This is the modified shift median line I showed at the beginning of the analysis for the SPX. We are back on the SPX chart. We are currently working within this shorter term median line set, and the trough that we're expecting this week, I think we'll either retest. This is a different median line set, but this is the upper warning line, which we have broken out of. We'll either retest this, or we'll come back and retest the all-time highs that we broke out of from way back over here in December of last year, or actually was it January 1st? Yeah, it was January 4th of last year. After that, I think we'll get a pretty strong move up to 5,000. We might not actually touch the median line, but I think we will go to 5,000. That does not mean we'll stop at 5,000. We can go higher. We can continue on much higher. However, in my opinion, as we look at these cycles, while we are somewhat early still in this blue cycle as of now, we are actually approaching the middle of this longer term pink cycle. After this next expected trough and move up, we'll be into the later half of this blue cycle, which is also going to start to put us into the later half of this pink cycle, and we have to start looking out for some downside. The current move is starting to look a little bit like this move here, and so I want to get into some similarities that we see here. The trough to peak was much longer here. This was 136 days compared to the current cycle where we're at 91 days. I'm expecting some more upside. We'll just say February 12th. That would be 108 days. This would be shorter. But if we were to go up to 5,000 from here, that would be about 19.5%. And if we take a look at this move over here, this was 18.8%. So pretty similar in those moves. But the thing I find most interesting about both of these is the movement that we have here is shaping up in a very similar way to what we have here, where we had a pretty muted trough in the blue cycle after a pretty strong move. We have a much stronger move, and then a pretty muted trough. And then the price action in the following cycle, very similar. We get a first push up pretty much to the high, and then we break above. And then in the third orange cycle, we make another high, and that's when we actually roll over in this cycle. We're about to move into the third orange cycle here, where I think we're going to make another high, and then we may potentially roll over. If that is the case, this cycle moved down about 6%. And if this cycle were to move down about 6%, I'm going to go to the SPX chart to show this. If we come up to 5,000 and we move down 6%, 6% puts us right in this area where we would likely need to retest. And if we look back at the prior cycle now on the SPX, after we pulled back, we did pretty much the exact same thing. We came right back into this range where it looks like we're putting in a similar type of range right now. So again, from 5,000, it's a little over 5,000, about 6% down, it would put us right down towards the bottom of this range. Eventually, we need to come back and retest further down here, and we need to fill this gap. If we look back at the longer term pink cycle, there is the potential that if we come back down here for this blue cycle, especially if we take out these lows, that gives a high probability that whatever top we put in here would be the top for this pink cycle. And then the next blue cycle should put in a lower high followed by a lower low, and maybe that is where we get that gap fill. That is very far out in the future. I don't plan on taking any trades according to that yet, but that's just a potential path that I want to consider. Is if we come up here to the 5,000 area we put in our first leg down, we get a bounce, maybe something like this. I don't know. I'm just kind of doing this willy-nilly here. And then we put in a lower trough where we maybe close that gap that's over here on the SPX. So it was fun to think about what might happen, but again, I'm not going to trade anything based on a guess. So how do we play this going forward? Well, I'm on the SPY right now, and I forgot to show this in last week's video, but the reason why I closed the rest of my calls and actually the rest of my long positions, again with the exception of the puts that I sold over here, was because we had, well, first of all, we had gapped up, and after a good move up with a lot of strength and then a gap up, that's just always a great time to sell any long position, or if it's in the opposite direction, sell your short position as the momentum is likely waning. In addition to that, we gapped up into the upper warning line of this median line set from the trough, peak trough, as well as the top end of this range right here. So we gapped up right into resistance, and it's not often that you gap up into resistance after an already strong move and then just continue to blow right through it. I do think we will break through this upper resistance in order to reach 5,000, which is roughly 500 on the SPY, after which time I think we will return to the downside. We're now on the SPX, where I want to look at a couple of trend lines, which will also show some overhead resistance. This orange trend line is the same angle of this orange trend line below from trough to trough. I put it on this peak up here. We're at that right now. I think we will overthrow this before we continue down. And I think we may even overthrow this as well. We have this trend line here, which we can also see the parallel trend line here. We may just find resistance at this one before we continue lower. As you can see, the last time we came up to the top of this trend line, we ultimately failed, and this was the same cycle right here that I was comparing this cycle with. So we may just do pretty much the exact same thing, find resistance at this green trend line and fail. So back to the ES. I'll be looking for this trough where I'll be going long. In this particular cycle, considering the similarities to this particular cycle over here, I won't be going as heavy with calls as I will be with selling puts, and I'll be looking to take profits pretty quickly, looking for a reversal. One way I'll be monitoring for the top to see when that is coming in is using both the 5-day and the 10-day moving averages. And again, let's go take a peek at the same peak that I was just comparing this with. I'll be looking for the same type of price action over here, where maybe we get a close or a couple of closes that begin to come in below the 5-day, and then once we get below the 10-day, right, and this one over here closed below the 10-day, that should be confirmation that the peak is in. I've added the PPO, and what we're looking for here would hopefully be a lower high if this rolls over in the expected area for the peak, along with a red dot to show that we have a sell signal. We got the same thing over here, and again in the same cycle that I'm comparing the current cycle with, where we have a high, we put a lower high in, and then of course on the big bearish day, that's where we actually get the signal. As we get closer to what I expect to be the peak, I will definitely put out another video to explain how I plan on trading this. The final thing I'll be looking for, while I will likely go short prior to this happening, but the true confirmation, as I've discussed in my other videos, will be breaking the prior orange cycle's trough. In this case, whatever trough we put in here. Once we break below that, it is possible we can put in a mid-cycle trough. Sometimes you get a mid-cycle trough, which takes out the prior cycle's low, or even the 2 prior cycles low, and then it continues higher. But usually once you take out a prior orange cycle low, there's a high probability the top for the whole cycle is in. If we look back, we don't see it here, right? Higher low, higher low. Here's the higher low. The only time we finally broke it was when we actually put in the longer term cycle trough. But if we come over here, higher low, and this cycle did extend. The cycles, again, are averages. They are not perfect. They're not going to be to the day every time. Sometimes they are, but usually they are not. We put in a lower high, but again, it's not until we break this cycle low that we can be pretty certain, or we can say with a higher degree of certainty, that the cycle top is in. And indeed, we did sell off for the remainder of the cycle. Going back to the cycle that I've enjoyed comparing our current cycle to, we can see the same kind of thing. Higher low, higher low. In the middle of this cycle, because all cycles can have a mid-cycle trough, we did break below this here. Looking at it on the hourly, you can see breaking below the beginning of the cycle occurred after we put in that high, which was the wick on the daily chart, and that did indeed mark the top. And then the rest of the cycle, while we did have a good bounce out, because again, this is a what I'll call a mid-cycle trough, we did have a good bounce out, but then we sold off for the remainder of the cycle. And this looks similar, not necessarily putting in a lower low than the beginning of the cycle, but the rest of the blue cycle where we sell off looks similar to what I'm expecting going forward with our current cycle. And so again, that may look something like this. We may not come down this far. Maybe we just retest this level here. I'm not suggesting we will definitely take out the low like we did in this cycle, but it is a possibility. It does appear that the market is starting to lose momentum to the upside, and that makes sense after such a strong move. As I mentioned in the prior video, the market needs to rest. It needs to consolidate, or it needs to correct before it can make any further upside. As always, thank you for watching this video, and be sure to subscribe for more.